Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Uncivilized Unplugged, a very special edition of this call. We used to do this call quite often before Zoom became something people had to do every day. For those of you on the call I do not know, my name is Traver Boehm. I'm the founder of the Uncivilized Movement, author of the books Today I Rise and Man Uncivilized, and a teacher. And this is a topic there. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for some time, especially with these two gentlemen who will be introducing themselves and then speaking a little bit about a program or two programs that we have coming up soon. The main one being the Behind the Masks of Men, which is a 3-month series where we're taking a topic for each month. The first month being anger and rage. The second month, which is actually co-ed, being relationship and attachment. And the third month, again, which is back to men only, talking about sex and desire. And this all came about, Michael, I'd love to pass the mic to you in a second, because after the men's initiation, which is this 5-day workshop that the three of us also run, we were sitting around having breakfast, kind of doing a debrief. And it was Michael who said, we have to go deeper. And I think that's kind of who Michael is. But also he's been in the game for a long time. I'll let him introduce himself and recognize. Michael, what was it about what you were seeing, what you've experienced, what you know about the men's world that really made that come alive for you and made it important for you to say, hey guys, this work we're doing is great, but it needs to go deeper?
Sure thing. Just for those of you that don't know me, I'm a therapist in private practice and have a long-standing history in the field of wilderness therapy and addiction recovery, and started doing that work in 2006. Been a student of Dewey's for numbers of years now, and met Traver a handful of years ago as well. And so maintain mostly private practice, working with folks all around the place and doing these intensives with these gentlemen. There are a couple of reasons. One is that men needed to tell their stories. There's a lot of stories that are just not told, and it's making us all sick. It's making men sick, their relationships sick, and their families, and their inner worlds. And so it's a place to talk about those things that stop energy from flowing, or also the ways that energy flows badly. And so we tried to come up with a long list of topics, basically, that in a nutshell, you could say these are the places that energy gets stuck or stops flowing, or it flows really badly. And we want to take a deeper look at why that is and how we can move through it together. What to do about it. Some of it's practical. There's just more of a need to really dive into the stories and to the specific topics that get men really stuck. There's parts of the conversation and parts of the work that aren't getting done. And we just needed to take it further if we really wanted things to move in the world of men.
Thanks, brother. Would you mind sharing just a little bit of the structure that essentially you came up with? And then we'll dive into anger.
Sure. So we try to stack it's going to be 8 hours of class time with Traver and Duey and myself. It's going to be two 2-hour classes during the day, and then one weekend big intensive 4-hour block where we really get in there. And so what the classes are going to involve is instruction from each of our 3 angles on the topic. It's going to involve places for people in the class to go into their own stories, their own experience. This needs to hit you personally. This is not purely a thought exercise. This isn't just a mental learning. This is meant to move something inside you. And so there's a community, relational, expressive piece. And then there's some homework that you can do. We're going to give you a lot more than you necessarily want, but it's available to you, readings and also exercises, journal prompts, just reflection points, takeaways, really break it down so you have something to refer back to integrate all this stuff. These topics are way bigger than what can be covered in 3 intensive days, but it's meant to give you the most effective start that we know how to give you. There are certain ways of reframing each topic that are incredibly empowering, and each of us have our respective angles. And that's why we wanted to do it with all three of us. We each carry different parts of what we'd like you to walk away with. And so that's the basic structure. It's meant to really get you unstuck. And where there's a number of ways we're going to approach the particular topic to get those things moving for you in your world.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. Would you mind diving in on anger and rage, Michael? Why is this important to you? Why is it important to men? What happens when the shift in relationship takes place? What have you seen?
Sure. Anger is one of those words that is, we probably need about 40 words for the one word that we use today as anger. It always makes it hard for us to work with something when we only have one word for it, especially when it's something that's a problem. It's different with love. Love can mean many things, but for something that's more of a problem, there's just a lot of nuance to anger. We're leading out with it because part of this is going into the shadow parts of men and men's experience. In anger, intensity, aggression, fear, creation, abuse, assault, being on the receiving end of or on the perpetrating end of is a big piece of the shadow of men right now and throughout history. So if we're going to really get into the shadow, we've got to start here. It's one of the things that'll come up for everybody when they get into this, into the shadow side. So anger, there's a couple of angles on this. We really want to delineate between essentially like a healthy, life-giving type of anger that most of us didn't have modeled, and the type of anger that most of us are familiar with that stops energy from flowing, that stops vitality from flowing, that causes harm to the self or others. So of the many places that we can go, we really want to emphasize the healthy side of it. We can talk about the shadow sides and the harm done, and we need to do that, but I want people to know how to do it better. So that involves men learn a lot by modeling. So we want to model what that looks like, what that feels like. We want people to really understand, because anger can also be incredibly life-giving. Inside healthy anger is authenticity, it is truth, it is realness, it is your core values. It's the things you deeply care about. It's what you want to protect and keep safe. And it's meant to be something life-giving. So we want to help it be something that's life-giving. And so anger directed outwardly, how to do that in a way that's life-giving. Also how to work with the inner terrain. Plenty of men don't express anger outwardly very much, but inside it's atrocious. They're completely imploded. And so we've got to work with that. Also, there's an intense epidemic of all kinds of depression in men. And anger is something that's so life-giving. If someone can mobilize some sort of like a fight response, that's something that can really get you out of a depression, the right type of fight response. And so we want to reclaim anger as a life-giving thing. And so that's part of it. And then the other side is acknowledging the shadow, either how we perpetrate or what happens when it's been done to us. And a lot of men have stories of what's been done to them. And so we need to get a big perspective, all the things on the table that need to be gone into, but we're only going to go into a couple of the key areas that we think will leave you with the biggest changes in your own life, with the things that help you to move your own energy and get unstuck. So we want you to really get honest about your own struggles, your own wounds, being on the receiving end of unhealthy anger, being on the delivering end of unhealthy anger. What's your inner climate? How much do you project? How much do you internalize? So mostly we're going to work on how to do it well and really focus on the difference between genuine anger versus drama. So that's the 10,000-foot view.
Michael,
Great.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Duey.
No, I just said that's great.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's exquisite, Michael. Would you mind sharing just from your own practice or from your own experience of working with men for this many years, what do you see when the relationship with anger changes? Like, what do you see in the external world? What do you see in the family? What do you see in how that man walks through the world? that's different?
My favorite part about it is how much authenticity and love is actually hidden in anger. Like, it's what people really care about, or the ways that the relationship has been like intensely damaged. And this is all people really know how to do. And so if you work with anger and you go deep enough in it, you find what people really love and what people really value that they don't know how to protect, or be in relationship with. And this is one of the wonderful things that Duey brings to all of this, is that it all comes down to relationship. And there's ways of doing anger relationally. And it's one of the most intensely intimate things you can do with someone else. And if you know how to do it and come out okay, then that inherently strengthens any bond that you have. If you can do it in yourself and your partnership or in your work relationships, there's a lot of intimacy that we're not getting to access because we don't know how to do anger really well. All that authenticity is lost in this complicated soup of not knowing how to hold that much energy in a conversation or in a point of connection. And so the first thing that comes is a lot of health, a lot of intimacy, and honesty. You can't go into anger without finding intense realness. It's just always right there. So that's my favorite thing about it, and the most beautiful thing about it to me.
Thank you, brother. Truly, thank you. Duey, is there anything you'd like to piggyback on that, or from your 80 million contact hours with clients?
80 million, huh?
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep exaggerating every time we get on a call.
All right, perfect. Well, first of all, I changed my mic a little bit, so can you all hear me good? Well, okay, perfect. I loved everything you had to say, Michael. And so this is a yes and to what you said. I see a huge difference between anger and rage. And when we can really truly hold anger, we use anger for power and protection. When we flip into rage, that's when we end up oftentimes being destructive. At least, and I'll tie that into attachment. Part of the reason I'm saying this is because a number of people talked about attachment. So the other one piece I'll say is, in many people suggest that we're not supposed to be angry and that there's always something under anger, like sadness. Many people talk about anger being a secondary emotion. And I don't agree with that at all. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it can cover something else. And as Michael was saying, anger is a depth of passion on so many levels, and we need to have that. We need to bring that. So
beautiful. Thank you, sir. And I'll just add quickly in a sentence or two, personally speaking, one of the biggest turning points in my own life was being able to say, I'm angry. And that was that was a game changer. Just being able to put names and words to it rather than this intense denial of it that led to like punching holes in the wall or feeling like I was going to explode. So I also just want to speak to the simplicity of so many men I know will say, I can't get angry or I don't get angry. Yet it's like they're seething inside. And Michael, I love that you talked about authenticity and intimacy. One of which is often a terrifying word for men, and it ain't the first one, because of a lack of intimacy with themselves. And so I think this pathway, the anger pathway, is a beautiful explorative pathway for all of you men on this call, and women too, but speaking directly to men, for self-knowledge and for understanding of who you are and what makes you tick. And if that isn't why you're here, I don't know why. Duey, would you mind taking the mic here and giving people a quick and dirty intro as to who you are and talk a little bit about relationship, attachment, why it's important, why we've made this one co-ed. And I know I'm asking, it's like, talk to me about the meaning of life in 9 minutes. But what do you love about it and why do you think it's important, especially now? I'd say let's frame it that way. Like, why now more than ever is having an understanding of an attachment and relationship vital?
Got it. Well, first of all, thank you. So I'm actually going to shift a little bit about and come in a little bit different door that I was planning on, because so many people put attachment in that chat. So I want to speak to that a little bit. And when you both were talking about intimacy, I want to talk about that a little bit. We as mammals, in our evolutionary process, evolved through a process of developing what's called a social engagement system. And what that means is that we need social engagement, which is essentially relationship, to survive. We need that at the core of our being when we're literally in the womb from conception and all the way through birth and then the rest of our lives. A couple of interesting pieces on relationship is that the relationship between the two people, and I know that there's other ways to do this, as far as artificial insemination, et cetera, but between the two people, when a baby is conceived between two people, the relationship between the two people that are creating that conception is highly determinative on what genes get enabled and what genes don't get enabled. So literally from the very beginning of conception, relationship affects virtually everything. In the process of attachment, which very, very quick and dirty definition of that is a deep, intimate, and the way I would say it, well, I'll say somatic, sort of the way I also say it, it's in our bones, relationship with attachment figures beginning in utero. And then that continues, we go through a process of healthy attachment for about the first, well, beginning in utero through about the first couple years of our lives. I oftentimes talk about the idea of, so I'm going to put a little pause button on that. I talk about the idea of contact, which many of you have heard me talk about contact. Contact, when we have that, which is a moment of time. I can come back to that if you want to know the definition. But contact over time, when contact becomes predictable, that creates connection between two people. When connection between two beings over time, when it's predictable, creates relationship. Relationship over time creates intimacy. And here's where I'm going with this. And both of you mentioned intimacy. The depth of our ability to be intimate is directly correlated to the depth of our attachment and intimacy. So take that in. And breathe a minute when you're hearing that.
Would you mind saying that one more time, Duey?
Yes, sir. The depth of our ability to be intimate is directly correlated to the depth of our attachment in utero and in infancy. Let me talk about that a little bit, because when I first began putting that together, I was literally, here you go, Traver. I was literally up with my horses. And it was like, and I'm like, when I go up every morning and feed, it's about a 30 to 45 minute process. That's sort of my meditative time. And it was like, it hit me like kaboom. And it was actually after a call with the heart space that I started thinking about this a little bit in these terms. Okay, and I knew that something was there, but it was like, okay, let me catch this. When people come and we work with them, like couples come and they're struggling with intimacy. And many times people have gone to many therapists. Like people, when they come and see me, they've been to 8 or 10 other therapists. And it's like almost probably 98% of the time, none of those therapists have gotten to the issues of attachment that the person has experienced or lack of attachment. And they're struggling with intimacy in their relationship, and not just sexual intimacy. That's a kind of intimacy in relationships, but it's every kind of intimacy that we're talking about. And like going back to what Michael said, being able to be angry with your partner in relationship can be one of the most intimate things that can happen. So also take that in. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about healthy anger, the kind that Michael was talking about. I'm not talking about the rage where we're trying to harm somebody. But hear this again, one of the most intimate times that we can have is diving into the vulnerability of anger, also the vulnerability of sex, the vulnerability of being with someone, the vulnerability of touching our hearts and our souls with each other, those kinds of things. What creates attachment, and this is why this is so important, is going through a difficult time in contact, in relationship with another person and coming out okay, and that being predictable is the core of attachment. So let me say that one more time. Being able to go through a difficult time with another person in contact, in relationship, and coming out okay, and that becoming predictable, that's the core of attachment, which is ultimately the core of trust. So those pieces that I just touched on, those are the kinds of things that we're going to do deep dives into in this course. And it's like, what happened in utero for you? What happened in your birth? What happened in the first year or two of life? How's your attachment or struggles with attachment affecting your intimacy with whomever you're with? And it's not just like your lover or your partner on that level. It's the same as, between Michael and myself, or Michael and Traver, or Traver and myself. And one of the things I said, Traver came up and helped unload 2.5 tons of hay this afternoon. One point, he jumped in my Bobcat with me, and then 30 seconds from the time he got in to the time we drove up to the top of the hill with a load of hay, it was like, boom, there we were. I mean, literally. And that's because of what has been built between us over the last number of years. And so there's that level of intimacy too that we're going to talk about. So that's sort of the overview of diving into social engagement systems, intimacy, attachment, and then everything that can build on to that around developing deep relationships with other beings. So that's sort of the quick and dirty, so to speak.
Can I jump in and say one thing right here?
I'd love you to.
What we'll get into a bit in the course more is some models of attachment that Duey has and development. And I really think a lot about the ability just to bond and to trust a bond with another being. A lot of the problems that people come to us with as therapists or whatever, where you're struggling in your relationship, often come down to these core, almost unconscious distrust of relationship itself and of closeness itself. And the template for that gets set early on. And so we get stuck in these patterns where we just don't know how to trust relationship itself as a thing. We expect it to go wrong. We expect it to go sideways. And some of the ways that we react and project that onto the relationship actually cause the thing that we're afraid of happening. We can get in patterns where we cause the thing that we're afraid of happening because of our projections. And those projections, part of what attachment is understanding that we're projecting a past experience of relationship onto our current. Past experience of relationship is projected onto the current. So we anticipate it going a certain way. And we can actually unconsciously create the thing that we say we don't want, the opposite of what we say we want. And if you really get how you learned to not trust yourself or another, then you can do something. You can really do something. Instead of breaking it down into just like communication issues or whatever it may be, that's like all up here level stuff. We're talking about like the tectonic, below the surface underpinnings of everything energetically, the energetic blueprint of relationship that we all act out. And everything else we do, like communication styles and even like love languages and all that stuff, that's kind of on top. We're getting into the core of your blueprint of what relationship is and feels like, and what to do with if you didn't get some good imprinting, how to be real about that and open about that. Dewey's model of attachment takes something that is very intense and very complicated feeling and can make it very simple on how to understand why it is the way it is and what to do about it, and just creates a lot of sanity in a very simple, concise way. You want to add anything, Dew?
No, I keep talking. You're doing great. Well, here's what I'll add. What we have put together is simple, like Michael's saying, and it's not easy. It's simple, it's not easy. And what Michael's also saying about this stuff up here, the love languages and communication, and that's like, if you're going to dig into it, that's like that's just the very first level of peeling the onion. And I just say, couples come into me and go, yeah, we fight a lot, we're not sexual anymore, and we need to learn how to communicate. And my first question is, tell me about your birth. And they look at me like you're crazy. And it's not quite that abrupt, but that's where we end up going. So yeah, that really, really early stuff. And like Michael was saying, it's somatic. We don't have memories of it the way that, like if I say, hey, what'd you have for breakfast? And you go, and you can sort of picture it. That's not the kind of memory we have. The memory is in our core. And that's what we're going to be digging into. Same way as what Michael was talking about, the memory of how to be angry is in our core too. Or how not to be angry, or how we get angry or rageful or whatever. Those things they're very deep inside of us. So again, simple, not easy.
It really occurs to me that along the lines of attachment, like in our ability to, like, there's a way that anger and where we're about to go into sex are the places where really intense energies are exchanged between two people. And we've got to learn how to hold those well. And attachment really is at the root of both of them. We can't talk about anger without talking about attachment. We can't talk about sex without talking about attachment. We can't talk about addiction and all kinds of stuff without talking about attachment. But nonetheless, like that leads us to our next section, which will be on sex and desire. So, Traver, could you say a little bit about what that section is going to be about, what it's going to be like?
Sure.
Why you wanted to include it so early on?
I'll share a quick story first. When I was first getting into men's work, I would co-facilitate workshops with a guy who most of you know, Connor Beaton, who runs Man Talks. And on the last day of the workshop, we would take all of the men, this is in Vancouver or outside of Vancouver in BC, and say, we're going on a hike today up to this beautiful overlook. It was like something out of National Geographic. And we would pair the men up together, 2 men at a time, and say, here's what we want you to do on this walk. We want you to talk about the first time you had sex. We want you to talk about your worst sexual experience or most embarrassing sexual experience. And then thirdly, what's something around this topic that you're interested in? And this walk would go for about 30, 45 minutes. And Connor and I would probably do the same. And we'd listen into what was going on in the background. And then we would get to the top of the overlook. And once the view had been taken in, we'd gather the guys together and say, or ask simply, how was that for you? And there was not a single man in any of the groups that we did this with who didn't say, that was the very first time I've had an honest conversation with another man about sex. That was the very first time. Now, the age range in this group was anywhere from late 20s to mid 50s. And so that should give us some insight into the general state of the sexual conversation. Yet, I think for the species to continue, this needs to be talked about. Like, this is something that's so engaged and so intimate, not to use a cliche word, in all of our lives. Yet if we're talking about men and we're talking to men, how many of us actually got real world, like legitimate sexual education? And I'm not just talking about like, that's where this body part is. This is how you roll the thing down the banana. Don't get her pregnant, don't get AIDS. Right? And where did most of our sexual education come from? I'll tell you where, if I had been on that walk 8 years ago in the middle of a marriage, I would have said the exact same thing. This is the first time I've had this conversation. I would like to thank my sex education teachers right now. They were Pornhub. Actually, it was like something else back 8 years ago before Pornhub, right? It was Playboy. It was dudes in the swim team locker room, kind of probably lying about stories, or it was friends' older brothers. So imagine any other situation with a human. Think of one that's like, what else could be this important and yet is so underserved and undereducated and under talked about and under supported? And that's just talking about the physical act. Right? We don't get beyond the physical act until we understand that, until we understand all that comes with it. Right? How many men have sexual shame in their background? You don't have to raise your hand, but how many? How many men have sexual trauma? How many men have sexual insecurity? How many men are terrified of sex? Yet what's the cultural push? Bro, you got to be good. You got to be hard. You got to lead. You got to know exactly what you're doing. You got to. And if you don't, you're not a man. So there's so much intensity. There's so much pressure. There's so much expectation. And it's met with an equal amount of a lack of education and just a lack of honesty. Right? Like a real world conversation. And again, that's just the physical act. We're going to get well beyond this in this conversation. Because sex is everything. Sex is life. Sex is creativity. Sex is vulnerability. Sex is intimacy. Right? I would not have been able to write my books having not gone through a journey of my own sexuality. I would not have been able to start Uncivilized. It gave me so much energy having gone through that journey. And this isn't intercourse I'm talking about. I'm talking about just having access to sexual energy. Just that alone was life-changing for me. And that's what I want to bring to the men on that call. That's what we're going to work in and work with. So yeah, we're going to talk about the shame. We're going to have an honest conversation about like, man, that happened. Wow, you carry that with you. Wow, you didn't know. I'm sorry you didn't know. No one taught you. No one taught me either until a couple of years ago. We need to demystify sex in the face of a society or a culture, let's say, that bombards us, right? Like you can't go 15 seconds on Instagram without sex. You can't go 15 seconds walking down the street without sex, without seeing it, with having it put upon you. Yet some of us are old enough to remember, I think it was Janet Jackson's nipple was almost shown on the Super Bowl, and the whole fucking country lost its mind. Right? So we have this very confused relationship with sex. We're not talking about the possibility. What happens when we get beyond friction? We're not even talking about friction. We're not even talking about how to have good friction. We're not even, especially in the men's conversation, we're either so hyper-focused on what's happening with our partner that we have to leave our own bodies and come up into our heads and run like spreadsheets and analysis, or we have to get ourselves so numb, high, drunk, whatever it is, that we have no idea of what's happening with her. Because, man, I just got to keep my dick hard. Because if I don't, everybody's going to fucking know, and then I'm not a man. So there's this tussle and this confusion. And I found from talking to and working with so many men now over the years that we don't need an encyclopedia of knowledge and a thesaurus of feelings and the spiritual aspects of fucking her to God, right? And entering the cosmos and subspace and power dynamic. We don't need to get into that. We can. Most men just need to be present in their own bodies so they can be present with whomever they're with, so that they can tap into this vital life force of creativity and the P word, not that P word, pleasure. And I'm not just talking about genital pleasure, but like pleasure everywhere in your life. That's what I'm interested in. That's why I love this topic. And I know, again, from helping so many men navigate their own sexual journey, that on the other side of it is a freedom. On the other side of it is self-esteem. On the other side of it is access to a power that they didn't have otherwise. And on the other side of it is safety for their partners. Right? On the other side is the entire smorgasbord of sex that has very little to do with penetration. Now imagine if every man on the planet was walking around with that. Think of all the problems that come from the shadow of sex. There's a reason why porn is like a $70 trillion industry in the US. There's a reason why sex is used to harm, and we have to fucking stop that. But we don't get to the shadow of it until we understand what it really is. It's a very important topic to me. It's a very emotional topic for me, and I hope it is for you all as well. Any of you two gentlemen want to add on to that?
Go ahead, Mike.
Sure, I'll add a little bit. If you all have some questions that are coming up for you around these things, just type them in the chat there.
Yeah, please.
Sexuality is an amazing place to explore connection to your personal truth, your realness, and also to power. Holding power very well, holding pleasure very well, enjoying life. So many men are lost in the doing, a really hard time with being. And sex is one of the only places that men can access being. And it's something that holds the attention of a lot of men. And it's a great gateway, and it's often the gateway for many men into their own health and well-being, because they have to take an honest look with what's true and not true in their world, inside them and outside them. The only thing I'd add is as part of this series, it's like the Behind the Masks, a men piece angle on it is there's a lot in that world that's just not talked about. There's a lot of classes out there on how to have sex. There's a lot of classes out there on trying to feel sexually powerful. But they're neglecting a lot of the ways that we got to where we are. Whether it's the abuse or the social conditioning or the lack of modeling, whatever it may be. So we're really trying to look at those pieces that men carry around that we don't have a place to talk about or think about or feel into, that directly show up and affect your power, your ability to feel pleasure or connected. So I can imagine in that terrain us talking about a lot of the things that happened for us or to us or never happened to us or for us that stop the energy from flowing. Got some questions flowing in. Dude, was there anything you wanted to add there?
I'm not sure if I have this all put together in my head right now, so let me try. The experience of each person having sex with another person, whenever those two people are together, their experiences are dramatically different in whatever is happening. And diving into the depth of our own experience is what most people talk about. Like, well, what was that like? And can I, like both Michael and Traver were talking about, can I stay hard? Can I do this? Can I do that? Am I a good enough lover? And we do need to do that. Being able to dive into our partner's experience just as deeply and have our partner dive into our experience, their experience as well as our experience, just as deeply, is what will literally change what happens between two people, or depending on the situation, two or more people, versus like, what's my experience? We need to have that, and we need to really be curious about what our partner's experience is.
Beautiful. Thank you, Duey. If you guys have questions in the last few minutes, we're going to field one here from the chat. We'll talk real quick again, or actually before we get into that, just want to say again, the program starts, I think, March 4th. Is that it, Michael? You're muted, brother.
March 1st.
March 1st
is anger class number 1.
Anger class number 1. Zach, would you mind throwing I know we've thrown the links in a couple times, but one more time. Again, anger and rage is men only, relationship and attachment, men and women. And then the third piece on sex and desire will be men only again. If you have a spouse, they want to, and you guys want to come join the relationship part together, please just sit in the same room on the same computer. That's a great option for you. So question from the chat, guys, and I'll let either of you field this. I feel like my anger was dormant until an event in my life unlocked a rage that has become too present these days and unpredictable. Have you heard of this before? Duey, Michael? I mean, Dewey's heard of everything, you guys. Like,
yep, I've heard.
Did you just get stumped, Duey? Was this like, nope?
No, I was sort of running through like how many thousands of times have I heard this? first, whomever put that in, thank you, because that the experience you described happens a lot. Two pieces, just this is quick and dirty.
Mhm.
One is start looking at your attachment and what happened for you. And if you need help doing that, we can help you do that. But the reason that it's coming up and it's like going kaboom, and you're, at least if I understood the question right, is it's like it's unpredictable. That's because it's buried so deep somatically in your body. And there's memories there there are somatic memories that need to be explored and sort of discovered. The other piece is in a therapeutic process. When that's happening, you need to find a place to be in a therapeutic process where you can express that anger in relationship and being supported by another person. Like going out in the woods and beating on a rock with a baseball bat, that's not, it'll take the edge off, but it's not going to get to where you need to go. That's quick and dirty. So.
Thank you, brother. Michael?
Yeah, just a quick response. That's the whole, well, that's one of the main functions of anger, is to say, I can't live this way anymore. And you see a welling up in someone when they just say, I can't live this way anymore.
Mm.
This is too much. Like, and something deep inside the system just says, like, this isn't, I want something different. I want something more. And part of what anger is that thing rising from deep inside of a person. It has to get different, and it has to get different right now. But there, like Duey said, there has to be intentionality around it. And so trust that the deep part of you is saying you can't do something anymore the way it's being done, and get some help on finding out how to do it the way that it needs to be done.
Mm. Thank you. We'll take one more quick one. I know we're about to run out of time. Duey, did you have something you wanted to add in real
I
quick?
was just going to say that at some point, discovering who or whom number, more than one, being who is that anger really at?
Mm.
That's one of the things that happens with anger that oftentimes turns into rage, is we come home and we metaphorically kick the dog, or we yell at our partners, or something along that line. And again, it takes the top edge off, but it ruins the relationships we're in. And it doesn't complete it because it's not being expressed toward whomever it needs to be expressed toward. And there's ways to do that without even necessarily doing that directly with somebody.
Duey, can you field this question from the chat? It says, it was right around that time that you were talking about your early childhood experiences affecting your experience of relationship later on. Someone typed in the chat, so if you had a really rough early childhood, then are you screwed with intimacy as an adult? Can you respond to that one, please?
No. Meaning, no, you're not screwed.
How come? How come?
Given set and setting, it's relatively easy to go back and finish that unfinished business that needs to be taken care of. It's just that we have to do that directly, and do that. Whomever wrote that needs to connect with someone who knows a lot about attachment and go back and take care of that. So here's and when I say relatively quickly, I don't mean in like 1 or 2 sessions. I mean in a few months and of really intense work. We can also, I don't know who put it in. That's the kind of thing we do at the initiations. So that's a possibility to do that work there.
We're probably not going to let her at the initiation.
Okay.
Even though we love her.
I didn't see who.
All good, all good. I'd love to grab this last one before we close up.
But the answer is no, you're not screwed for the rest of your life.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't want to shame the asker, but I just want to, here's the question. What shame do men feel about sex? And why do some men feel shame about masturbation, etc.? I think one of the unique points, and again, I love the question. Thank you for asking the question. And I think it's a very common question that is misunderstood, that men actually would feel shame around sex. Just that that possibility would even exist hasn't really gotten into the collective. So I love the question because it also highlights that, wow, a lot of people don't think that men could have shame around sex. And so I'll let you two gentlemen chime in if you would, but just want to also share, think of how, again, what if you listen to what my earlier piece of how much expectation there is. You may not know this, but how much is riding perhaps for that man on that moment. I gotta be fucking good at this. This is literally tied into my self-esteem and who I am. Or so if the experience doesn't go well, how much potential shame that could carry. Or was he teased? Was he made fun of? Is he insecure about his body? Like these are real things that also aren't misunderstood about men, that a lot of men aren't comfortable with their shirts off. A lot of men aren't comfortable with their pants off. A lot of men aren't comfortable with many, many, many aspects about sex because of their histories, because of their pasts. I don't want to throw the church under the bus, but because of the damn church, right? A lot of it is in there. And I will say probably for shame about masturbation, family history, were they caught by a parent? Were they shamed by a parent? Were they shamed by someone in their family? Were they shamed by the church? Is it in their community to view sex as bad, view sex as shameful, view sex as dirty? Right? There's a lot of programming out there that gets picked up by men that isn't really talked about in the male culture, because men only want one thing, don't we? Shoulder high surf and fucking peanut butter and banana. Michael, you got a thought on that?
I guess I would say there's a phenomenon that is talked about in sociology where there's like a template for what's true for or about different people. Like what's true for men, there's a story about what's true for men in the culture. What's interesting about the story that exists, the average person might guess is the story for most men around sex, is not the story of actual men out there. And that's just like for some reason, that's the way that cultures and societies work, is there's often ideas about what the experience is for a certain group of people or a certain person or demographic of people. And it's often wildly untrue if you take a representative sample of the population out there. And I would say a lot of the stories about men and sex and the way that men experience sex are not true in men's experience. You know, our days are filled with the stories of men who do not have the same story as what's out there. And there's like a weird internal experience for men that they don't match that. They feel like they're alone or unique or strange. Mm-hmm. And so part of what we're doing in this course is trying to burst that bubble a bit. No, the actual experience, what should be the story, what is more common is this and this and this. And let's get really real about it. And you might not know that unless you're a part of like men's groups a lot and talk with tons of other men freely about it, which men don't do. So it's people like Duey and Traver and myself that get to hear stories for years and years and years. We get to say, oh my God, what people think is happening is not the mainstream experience at all. And so we can bring some health to everybody by not having them stuck in that dissonance. That makes sense.
Beautiful point, Michael. Thank you. Do you have any final words before we wrap up and let people go grab some dinner?
Yeah. What Michael's talking about is right on. Shame is oftentimes, instead of being upset about something that happened, where we become that upsetness. In other words, shame around sex. It's like, my penis isn't big enough. I can't stay hard. I can't make the woman I'm with come. I can't
Mhm.
And instead of going, gee, I wonder what's going on, or what do I do with this? It's like the shame becomes, I'm not big enough. I'm not hard enough. I'm not good enough. And
Mhm.
so the depth of shame around men and sexuality is, I think it's different than the shame that some women carry. And it's just as pervasive.
Mm. Thank you. And thank you both for joining. Folks, thanks for spending your time with us, your energy with us. We hope this is valuable. We've sent the links everywhere. I'll email them out again tonight. Behind the Masks of Men. And for any of you that are interested in some live work with us, we are in Austin in March for the men's initiation. Have a great evening. We appreciate you all. Michael, Duey, love you guys. Look forward to putting this on with you. Have a great rest of your night.
Love you
Cheers,
all.
guys.